Hey everyone, it's Phil Brunergraber again with This Is Crazy. So I haven't made a video in a while. I had kind of stepped back from doing these videos from being a live coach, which was something I was pursuing and getting into a little bit, especially when COVID hit and the opportunity to do that really sort of dried up. I love doing my little motivational videos. I love talking to people about how to make themselves more productive and live with more efficiency in their lives and more joy in their lives. And so, in a way, I suppose I can still do that, but I had stepped away from it. I had too many things going on besides teaching full time, raising my children, continuing to write and publish fiction and nonfiction. I decided that was the thing that had to fall off the table. Then I'm making a video today. Then why? All right. So it's actually today is November 4th, 2020, which means yesterday was the 2020 election. And obviously, there's been a lot of print, there's been a lot of videos, there's been a lot of posts all over social media. Everybody was paying attention, focused, interested in this election. It appears to be a really high stakes election. I would argue every election has a lot at stake, so I'm not sure how much more this one has than others, except that there was just a lot of focus on the individuals running, especially with regards to President Donald Trump. And he has really high supporting numbers, like the supporters who support him do so strongly. And then he has really high negatives on the flip side, right? So, because of that, this election became very contentious. And there's a lot going on underneath all of that. And I'm kind of disappointed at the moment. It hasn't been called, right? It appears as though Biden will probably eke it out or win by a little bit. And then some of those states he's going to win are really tight. His margin of victory is going to be really tight in those, as was Donald Trump's margin in 2016. So it does appear as though it's going to, but at the moment I have no way of knowing how it'll go, and it isn't relevant to this video and how I feel about everything because it turns out I didn't vote for either Joe Biden or Donald Trump. And I feel very good about that. It seems as though there's been a lot of voter shaming and bullying online and in other spaces. It's pretty ugly. It seems as though people expect you to vote for the candidate that they like, and they hate the voters that vote for the other candidate, but it seems as though they almost hate the voters who don't vote for either of them more. And I find that a little interesting. I haven't voted for the two major parties for quite some time. I think the last time I did so was Bush in '04. I had just come out of the Army. I was still pretty conservative, which is how I was raised. I was raised in a Republican conservative home. And I voted Bush in '04. That was actually the first presidential election I had voted in. In '02, I was active duty, and anyone who's been active duty will tell you it can kind of be a pain to vote depending on your situation. So I had not voted until '04, and I've voted every election since then, including every little special election that California insists on having. So I once again did not vote for a Democrat or a Republican. I tell people that I refuse to support the lesser of two evils, right? It was especially true in this election. It was largely true in the 2016 election, where everyone, or many people, kind of recognized the flaws of the two major candidates. And I started espousing that adage from then on. I refuse to support the lesser of two evils because voting for the lesser of two evils is still voting for evil. And I don't want to do that. Now, that seems dramatic, right? To say, oh, well, they're evil. But I think you can justify that without a doubt. I think that it's probably justifiably evil to be bombing sovereign nations constantly, to be supporting Saudi Arabia as they engage in a genocide in Yemen. It seems evil to violate our own principles of liberty by holding people indefinitely with no hope of a trial, with no rule of law, due process of law. no legal representation. It seems problematic. It seems evil to have a system in our country, an immigration system, a migration system, in which we have tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of undocumented people living here as essentially second class citizens, contributing in a way to our economy through work. Some of them, I understand, participating in the welfare state, but many of them working, and yet they're not free to call law enforcement for fear of being arrested. They don't feel comfortable engaging in the services of our nation because they're living here as second class citizens. That seems evil, right? The way we treat people who are here as migrants and undocumented seems evil at levels. It seems evil to strap hundreds of thousands of students with government student loan debt and then dangle a carrot of like, well, we'll dismiss this debt bondage, as I call it, if you vote for our party. That seems manipulative and evil. It seems evil at a level to shame voters for voting their conscience, for voting their values, for voting their principles. And yet there's a lot of that right now. So yes, I truly believe that the two parties are corrupt, that the two parties are evil, and that their candidates who participate in those things are also complicit in that corruption and complicit in that evil. I know that's dramatic. I'm a dramatic guy. Get over it. So I refuse to participate in the two-party system, and I refuse to participate and vote for those two candidates or either of them. So I vote third party, although I voted Libertarian Party this time and Gary Johnson Libertarian candidate last time, Joe Jorgensen this time. But honestly, and I'll get into that a little bit, and I like a lot of the principles of libertarianism, but honestly, I will support EU voting any third party. I feel as though the power and the stranglehold that those two parties have on our political system must be broken. They are essentially almost one party even, and I can get into that in further episodes of this if I do that. I'm not sure what to do with this yet. It might become a podcast. I know everybody's got a podcast now. I'm not doing it for the trend. I just I have a lot of things to say, and sometimes it's cathartic for me to sit here and say them. And occasionally people come around and say, hey man, you know, those things you were talking about really helped me understand, or I engage in conversation with them, so I appreciate those things. I firmly believe those two parties have far too much power. I think that they give us the illusion of choice. And although I will gladly use the term deep state, and I don't necessarily mean it in a conspiratorial way, but at least in a way that the institutions that our government has created that perpetuate indefinitely and are not filled with elected positions have a lot of power as well, whether it's the IRS or the CIA or the FBI, DHS, right? ATF. They make all sorts of policy decisions that affect Americans daily and infringe on our rights and liberties daily. And those aren't elected people. They're appointed by the government. And so I have a huge problem with that as well. I don't think that there's a lot of accountability for those institutions. I think our university system is another one that's grown shockingly corrupt and evil at a level, to continue to use that dramatic term. So I think that their power needs to be removed. The people need to take back some of the power that we've granted these institutions and these people that are supposed to represent us. We need to take that power back. And unfortunately, we can't really do it. The vote is our number one tool. It's the most power we have as an individual. We each have it, and we should use it to remove power from them. Instead, in this election, there was record numbers voted for Biden. I'm sure Trump's numbers were really high as well, the number of votes that he got. So that represents their power. When they get millions of votes, that's how much power they have. Tons of it, right? And so I believe we need to remove it by voting for other options. And if you're not If you don't care for the libertarian principles, great. If you would vote anything else, Green Party, if you're really worried about climate change, I applaud that and respect that and support that. If there were a progressive party, I've said in past videos in passing, with regards to justice in America and racial justice in America, I think there should be a political party for Black Americans. Start their own, because I don't feel as though either of those parties are representing Black Americans very well at all. And so I fully support creation of a party to represent Black Americans' needs. And I think this is evident in that the two parties are never improving anything at all. How many years have we complained about our immigration policy, and has it actually improved? We complained under the Bush years of our foreign engagements in Iraq and Afghanistan. And then when Democrats had an opportunity to change that and Obama ran on ending the Iraq war, we got involved in other areas, in Syria, in Yemen, in Libya. All of a sudden we were violating Pakistan's sovereignty, and I understand we were going in there to get Osama bin Laden, but Pakistan has national sovereignty. And how would we feel if another country just showed up with special forces in our country to snatch somebody out, kill them, and just take off in some helicopters? We wouldn't tolerate it. And yet we expect other nations to tolerate us violating their national sovereignty on the daily basis virtually. So none of those things are okay. And furthermore, not only do they not solve things, healthcare is just as bad as ever, right? The Affordable Care Act was passed under Obama. Immediately, it kind of had a ton of problems, right? You can keep your doctor, all these things. And a lot of lies were sold to us as American people with regards to how the Affordable Care Act would work and how it wouldn't work and what it would look like. And now it's almost all but destroyed. And we're no better off with regards to healthcare than we ever have been. And while there's been solutions offered, the political will has never existed to solve them. Why? Well, because the insurance companies have huge lobbies and they pay our politicians that are supposed to represent us a ton of money so that they keep making a ton of money. And of course, I can get into that in further episodes if I choose to do more episodes. And I find that the parties do sort of the opposite of what their values are supposed to do. It's almost as though if you want something to get done, you have to vote for the party that at least on paper opposes it, and then they'll make it happen, right? So for instance, I just mentioned foreign entanglements, to use a term that popped up in 2020. Foreign engagements, the Democratic Party was all against Bush's involvement in Iraq and Afghanistan, and then when put in power, did nothing to stop those two conflicts and engaged in further conflicts. Ironically, it was President Trump, the Republican, who was trying, at least expressed interest in removing us from Syria and getting us untangled from some of these foreign conflicts. And then when you look at things like, I remember Bush passed a law, kind of championed and passed a law to reduce drug costs for seniors, which was an interesting thing for him to do. Crime bills are passed under Bill Clinton, right? The Democrat passes this crime bill written by Joe Biden, a Democrat. And there's, of course, a very famous video of Joe Biden, I think on the floor of the Senate, talking about it, or maybe he's in campaigning or something, talking about how it's Democratic crime bills. Those are the bills that keep getting passed, that keep incarcerating more people, including people of color, including minorities. So ironically, the party that claims to be the champion of the minorities in this country often tend to do things that make their lives worse. The so-called cages on the border, were in fact created during Obama's administration. Some of the photos initially that came out when Trump was busy and his border patrol was busy engaging in conflicts with people at our border. Some of the photos that came out, look, because of what Trump's doing, those photos were from 2014. They were from when Obama was in power. And so it seems as though, and Republicans are doing a terrible job of reducing debt and deficit. If the Democrats are in charge, Republicans scream about the debt and the deficit. And yet, when they're in power, it just goes up by trillions of dollars. Nobody does anything about it. So if you want to spend more money and rise and increase the debt and deficit, well, then elect Republicans because they'll make sure it happens. They only resist increasing our debt when the Democrats are in control, right? And Democrats seem to only resist foreign wars when the Republicans are in charge. They complain about it. When they're in charge, they're all for it. So there's this very bizarre system in which it appears to be that they're really more like one party. They really operate as a party that favors elites, that favors the so-called oligarchs, that favors people with money and influence who can lobby for their attention, and therefore nothing ever changes, right? I really do kind of hope that Biden wins so that I will at least be screaming, okay, now the things we wouldn't tolerate under Trump, let's make sure we don't tolerate them now, because my guess is that we'll tolerate them. And then I'll just continue screaming about how terrible the two-party system is and how those parties are completely corrupt and they need to be completely dismantled, and new parties need to be formed that actually represent our needs much better. So enough about that. We'll try to keep this under 30 minutes. Our podcast's 30 minutes. Does that seem reasonable? Perhaps, right? So I voted Libertarian, right? The Libertarian presidential candidate was Jo Jorgensen this year. She seems like a fantastic human. She's a professor of psychology, I believe, at Purdue. So she has a PhD. She seems like an awesome person. She was eloquent. She wasn't an especially charismatic human, but she at least could consistently formulate very clear arguments and thoughts, which the two main candidates in Trump and Biden didn't seem capable of doing. That first debate was just such a disgrace. It was just a complete disgrace, just arguing back and forth and interrupting each other, and nobody said anything that mattered at all, and we learned nothing from that debate. And then, ironically, Republicans were blaming Chris Wallace for me. So yeah, when Republicans are blaming Chris Wallace, you know that's a problem, right? So obviously, if media is finally holding someone accountable and they're mad about it, that's usually what's going on there. So I vote Libertarian. Libertarian principles, I'm sure, are, again, if I make this a real thing, I get into it a bunch, but I feel as though they more closely resemble early America. And it is usually based on the idea that individual people should have as much power and liberty to run their lives as absolutely possible. That the government should be about as small as we can possibly make it, and allow as much freedom and liberty for individual Americans as possible. Now, there may not be much appetite for that now, but I feel like there is. I feel like there's probably plenty of appetite for that, especially with regards to how poorly the government is doing resolving some of these issues. I think more and more people would love to simply take care of themselves then, and no longer look to the government for solutions to their problems, but instead just take control over their own lives. Now, the problem, of course, is if you're in charge of your own life, you have to be accountable to yourself, and people don't like being accountable to themselves. They like blaming other people or blaming the government for not being there. And obviously, a number of events occurred throughout our history to sort of get us away from those principles. Woodrow Wilson put a huge dent in some of them with the creation of the Federal Reserve, and then also creating the income tax. Income tax was not legal. It wasn't legal to simply tax people for working, which I have a huge moral objection to. The more I work, the more money you take from me. That doesn't seem fair at all. It seems as though I should continue to keep the proceeds of my labor, but the more you work, the more you'll be taxed. And we're not taxed at a small amount, right? So I'm a high school teacher. I'm a high school teacher. I don't make a massive amount of money. I'm being taxed at the 28% bracket. 28% of my income. More than a quarter of my income is going to just the federal income taxes. That's before California takes income taxes. That's before I consider all the sales tax I pay, the property taxes on my property, right? We could consider the fees for my vehicle as another tax. There's a number of taxes we're paying besides what FICA that goes into Social Security and Medicare. We're being taxed a lot. And there was a very kind of libertarian movement a while ago with the Tea Party, and it was immediately branded as a racist group. And maybe there were elements of racism in it, but I don't really see a ton of those. We're manipulated quite a bit by the media, so I'm very hesitant to believe what I see in media. But it was essentially an idea that, look, man, you're taking far too much from us. You have got to leave us alone more and let us keep more of our money to do what we would like with it. And that's a very libertarian principle, and it was very normal in early America. Early America, there were very few laws governing people. There were very few taxes. In fact, the government kind of had to get creative to find ways to pay for things, right? Including paying for the Revolutionary War, which we ultimately never really paid France back, anyways. Um, so I like a return towards some of those principles in that direction, at least, right? So some people will argue with me, oh, that's unreasonable. We can't just have this laissez-faire, wild west world. First of all, we could, but second of all, I'm not saying we should go directly to that and just eliminate government at all levels, but I certainly feel like we should go in that direction. I certainly feel like our government has usurped far too many of our liberties and our freedoms from us, and that moving in the other direction and getting some of those back would be great. We almost lack complete privacy at this point. Our government, under the Patriot Act that was signed by Bush, that allowed them to look into our emails, etc., has been renewed every single time it's come up, including by Democrats. They don't mind looking into our emails just as much as Republicans don't mind looking into our emails and collecting our phone data now. The government collects our phone data. Why? Why do they need that information? Exactly how many terrorist attacks happen every year from foreign entities? Oh, well, the domestic terrorists, Phil. Come on, man. There's always domestic terrorists. I mean, okay, so our goal is what? Spy on every single American to make sure that none of us ever do anything. And I know the FBI's involvement in trying to push people towards terrorist acts is pretty disheartening as well. So I don't trust them, and I don't trust the government. I feel as though governments are historically tyrannical. I mean, a government is literally about controlling people and society. Now, we all agree governments ought to exist. It's just a matter of to what degree. How much power should the government have to control our lives? How much power should the government have to say what we can and cannot do, where we can and cannot go, right? And I think as little power as possible. That's my answer. Let's restrict their power as much as possible and get back to more of a system where we had some more say over our own lives and didn't have to ask permission from a government constantly to do things that seem reasonable. In some communities, gathering rainwater is illegal. I can't purchase this property and drill a well on my own property because of city ordinances. And they provide water for me, so I understand that. But how well does that go? How well does it go in areas like Flint, Michigan? And there's others where the water isn't safe to drink. It was literally poisoned with lead in Flint, Michigan. And you're telling me the government can't solve that yet? It still hasn't been able to solve a water supply problem in the United States of America in 2020? But you want me to put even more faith in the government, give them even more power and control over my lives to provide the things that I feel I need to thrive? I don't like it at all. I feel as though people are in fact capable of ruling ourselves. We are in fact capable of making decisions that are best for us. Now, you can argue, well, some people do it better than others. Of course, that's always true. You're not going to create an equitable society. You just can't do it, even in situations where they've tried to do it and they have to do it by force, mind you. And of course, yes, we're talking about a communist Soviet Union or a fascist Germany or a fascist Italy, which was more about elitism, right, than egalitarianism, or a communist China. You have to force it on people, and you have to enforce it through pretty tyrannical means. And even then, there's hierarchies are formed within those societies, right? It becomes, oh, who's the higher ranking person in the Communist Party, or who has more favor amongst the government elites, in this community. It becomes a hierarchy in and of itself. It just isn't based on wealth anymore. It's now based on political favor, right? And so you can't avoid that. So I would prefer there be a system where we are all allowed to sort of live and thrive based on our own merits and efforts. And I think that we could form a very functioning, very free and fair society with far less government regulation than there currently is. And perhaps I'll go into all of these things if I decide what to do with this. But for now, I wanted to express my initial thoughts regarding that election and where I stand and kind of put that out there because my partner and I have these conversations all the time, and she tells me constantly, "Well, what are you doing then? You know, you don't vote for Democrat or Republican, and you feel all good about that." And I do. I sit there and pat myself on the back, right? Yay, me. I'm not participating in the lesser of two evils. But what exactly is it I'm doing then? Am I really helping anybody? Am I doing anything to change the system, to rage against the machine, to evoke the name of one of my favorite bands? No, not really. So perhaps this is something, right? What am I good at then? I'm good at talking. So maybe I can talk. Maybe I can help educate some people and help get people to think. That's been a thing in the past with regards to printing pamphlets or then radio channels and radio shows or TV. Now it's podcasts is the medium of the day, right? So perhaps that's something I can do to help people understand what's going on. There's a ton. You know, our government has blood on its hands all over the place, and both parties are neck deep in it. And in 2020, a pandemic hit us, and the government shut down our ability to function economically. A bunch of small businesses have closed and will never open again. They tossed us some crumbs in the CARE Act, and meanwhile, some of the largest, most profitable institutions got trillions of dollars. Trillions of dollars was created and given in the hands of Steve Mnuchin, the Treasury Secretary, to just hand out to whatever corporations he felt like needed it. Meanwhile, regular Americans are suffering constantly, losing homes now again, like we did in '08. And the government's not doing anything to help us. It's helped their friends, right? The people who support their campaigns financially, fiscally, and who lobby for their attention. That's who's getting bailed out in 2020. Meanwhile, you and me are suffering on the daily basis and hoping we make it, and hoping something changes soon so that we can get back to enjoying our lives and feeling secure financially and socially in other ways. So I'm not thrilled. It doesn't matter who wins the election for me. I love to quote the Who song, won't get fooled again. And at the end of it, it says, meet the new boss, same as the old boss. That's how I feel about a Biden victory. Biden's been in government for almost 50 years. And all of a sudden he has solutions that are helpful for us. And I love them trying to bait us. If you elect us, we'll figure out what to do and how to help you guys. Oh, well, what's the plan now? Senator Harris is in the Senate currently. She could introduce a bill if she had a bunch of ideas, right? And Pence and Trump are in the executive. They could help us right now if they wanted to. They just choose not to. And so I'm very tired of it. And I think American people should be tired of it. And I think we could do much, much better. But we have to wake up. And we have to see them for who they are. And we have to quit looking to our politicians that are in power in those two parties for answers, because they don't have any for us. And they don't have our interests at heart. If they did, they would do things to help us. But they don't. They're interested in maintaining power, and they're interested in gaining more power. And that's all they do. And they blame each other. But meanwhile, behind closed doors, they're hugging each other and getting dinner together and talking about how they just confirmed another Supreme Court justice, and Democrats pretended to be mad about it but didn't really do anything to stop it. And it's a joke, and I think that they view us as a joke. And so we should turn the tables, and we should really take our power back, and we should renew sort of the flames of revolution. And I don't mean violent revolution, but the things that were commonly talked about as we led up to our separation from Britain, whether it's Thomas Paine or Thomas Jefferson or Ben Franklin. There was a lot of those early Americans who really understood what liberty and freedom meant. And I think that we have forgotten, and we've given much of our liberty and freedom up because we were asleep. And I think it's time to wake up. Well, that's enough of this rant for now. I'll figure out what I'm going to do with it and what that looks like. If you watched through the entire thing, I appreciate you a ton. And if somehow you have something you want to ask or comment, please comment. And I would love to have a dialogue. Otherwise, we'll see what I come up with next. Thank you for watching. Philip Grunengraber, This Is Crazy. I'm out.